All right, what's up, you guys? Good morning. Good to be here. Sorry for a few minute delay. I was having some problems on the computer interface. Couldn't get the live video going, but I think we're good here on the phone. So anyhow, I want to chat a little bit about exercise prescriptions. We've had some great videos over the past couple of weeks. I mean, Mitch in the group on the fitness athlete page, always doing a good job talking about loading. Eric with his great drop set discussion, and just this general continued theme of the importance of loading, but the importance of doing it in ways that actually get the job done and that are appropriate for that N equals 1. Because that's where I think we have the problem. We historically, I think, have issues when we try when we fail to nuance these different loading paradigms, and when we fail to nuance everything for that matter, but when we fail to nuance these loading interventions for that individual patient, I think that's where things get squirrely, and we start losing track of things in minimizing outcomes. So we know that loading is critical, and I would really encourage everybody who's sort of preaching this loaded sermon, right? That you read the science behind the sermon. And if you go back and read Karim Khan's work in BJSM, read that article on mechanotherapy in 2009. It's open access, so you should be able to read it. Getting that level, and then Sharon Dunn, her article in Physical Therapy Journal in 2016. So those are two articles talking about mechanotherapy and transduction. And when you really read those and you get that deep understanding for what is going on at the cell level when you progressively load somebody, I think your level of confidence to really stay the course with a loading program, because you think about tendinopathy and how long it can take sometimes to really remodel those tissues and get someone back to pain-free function. For you to have that commitment to the program really requires that deep understanding of the science behind the sermon of apply load, right, or load it. So those two papers, the Karim Khan paper in BJSM in 2009, Sharon Dunn's article in 2016 in JOSPT. And I can load I have a podcast right after this at 7, but I can load those abstracts underneath this video so you guys can have a look at it. So anyhow, take a look, understand the science, because if you understand the science, your willingness and accuracy of prescription is going to be a lot higher. And I want everyone to appreciate that this concept of loading isn't just critical in tendon issues. Now, granted, we probably have the most literature in that area. It's probably the most discussed, but right now I'm heavily interested in workplace interventions. So I'm spending a lot of my time, both here at Colorado in Motion, where I work in Colorado, looking at how can we help workplaces? So whether I'm dealing with Colorado in Motion here or APHBT on the national level, we're really working hard to figure out how we can come alongside people in the workplace and prevent injuries, promote wellness, and what are some of the key interventions. And when you look at the literature, what we see is the importance again of loading. Right? So there's an article, Effectiveness of Workplace Interventions in the Prevention of Upper Extremity Musculoskeletal Disorders, published by ERD in 2015 in Occupational Environmental Medicine. And the one strong recommendation they make is it seems that resistance training can greatly reduce upper extremity injuries. So compared to everything else we can do, ergonomics, etc., when you look at the systematic or updated the evidence, the review level, it does again appear that resistance training seems to be where the magic happens. Many of you might have saw the reduction in headache article. Did you guys see that by Anderson in 2017? It's in Musculoskeletal Science and Practice. Just came out in August. Right, showing a 50% reduction on average for shoulder progressive strengthening to treat headache. So 50% reduction in headache following a progressive shoulder strengthening program. But again, it was progressive, right? And in that article, it's nice at the bottom of it, they have all the sets and reps mapped out through each week. But it was 1 hour of resistance training per week, broken up into a variety of different ways for different groups. And the individuals that had supervised progressive resistance training had on average 50% reduction in headache. I mean, the point here is that it's not just tendinopathy, although I certainly appreciate that that's where a lot of our literature is and time spent. But it appears that being able to accurately and specifically progress load for individuals solves a whole host of problems or prevents them in the first place. The issue, I think, is that we're not sure where to start. So we're either not sure where to start, so we get a little bit of paralysis by analysis. So for any given patient, we just give them what we usually give people, or we're not tracking it well enough. And so we're not adjusting or nuancing that load to really meet that patient's presentation. So that was really what I want to chat about this morning, is that idea of how to know if we understand the importance of load, and we know that it's important across a wide variety of platforms. How much do you give people, right? And how do you know how to specifically dose that? And so I would argue that you start with irritability. I guess I would argue that for most things I talk about, but I would argue that you start with irritability. So understanding a patient's level of irritability as you go through their subjective exam and their body chart and their physical exam, you get a pretty good idea for how much tolerance does this person's tissue have, right? Meaning that how much can I apply to them without really putting them through the roof, right? Without dramatically escalating their symptoms, ruining their day, ruining their week. How much tolerance does this person's tissue have? What is their level of irritability? So that gets you in the ballpark. That gives you some level of idea of how hard you can push them, right? From both an intensity-wise, a volume-wise, etc. So irritability gets you in the ballpark. And then if you look at articles like proximal hamstring tendinopathy, Tom Goom's article in 2016 in JOSPT, I like some of the guidelines they give, that they sort of define these pathologies, these tendon issues, as either stable or irritable. Stable being that they have, after exertion, they have mild to moderate pain for 24 hours, but no more than that. Whereas irritability, when you challenge that tissue, it lasts well beyond 24 hours, right? So getting that idea of, do I have someone who's got a pretty stable condition on my hands that I can really load up, or do I have someone who has a more irritable condition on my hands? And maybe I want to kind of kiss into it a little bit, give them a little bit of dose, maybe reevaluate, see how things are feeling, give them a little more dose. And then once you have given it to them during their activation of the exercises, you want to use their quantity of pain to give you some insight, right? So if somebody has 3 out of 10 pain or less, right, you should be pretty comfortable that the amount of load you have given them is appropriate for their presentation. On the other hand, if they have 7, 8, 9 out of 10 pain during the exercise, that's probably a bit high, right? So using the amount of pain during the actual performance of the exercise. And then I think where we fail the most is tracking that 24-hour pain pattern, right? So using those soreness rules following challenge to see whether or not we hit the sweet spot. And that's really what it's all about. So after you decide, okay, I think I have a relatively non-irritable pain, a non-irritable presentation on my hands. So I'm going to give a fairly decent sized dose, right? Both in the amount of reps that we're doing, the challenge of each rep, and the overall volume in a given day for that individual. The real answer is probably found the next time the patient comes back in. Right? So if you prescribe dose to somebody, you really need to tell them, look, I want you to track how this feels tomorrow, because we're going to use your response to this over the next day to be able to fine tune and figure out if we're really giving you the amount, the proper exercise prescription. Right? And so when that patient comes back in, there should be that conversation of, first of all, hey, how's it going? Reassessing their overall asterisk signs. And then, hey, how did the next 24 hours play out? So we challenge those tissues. How did things go for you over the next 24 hours, right? Because if somebody says, hey, it was pretty status quo the next morning, and I was certainly back to baseline or better the next afternoon, right? We're in business, right? Their tissues are tolerating that amount of load. Now, if they're to say, hey, I had no effect whatsoever, I had no increased soreness, no increased pain, no change in function, there could be an argument that there was an underdosing going on there, right? On the other hand, if they say, dude, Jeff, I was way worse the next day. Like, I mean, I got up, I had a much harder time than usual with the stairs. And to be honest with you, man, that even leaked into the following day. All right, that was too much, right? That was too much. I mean, we significantly interfered with their ADLs, right? We hampered their functional activities. We overdosed them. So it's really that following of that 24-hour pain pattern that's going to give you insight into whether or not you were right. So if you think about how this really goes then, right? So you get a gauge in the patient's irritability, and that gives you that gets you in the ballpark, right, of where you should go with that initial dosing. Then you monitor their discomfort during the actual exercise performance, right? 3, 4 out of 10 or less, we're fairly comfortable with that. Then you send them home with those real specific instructions of, hey, I need you to track this out, how it goes tomorrow, the next 24 hours. I need you to bring that information back to me. And when that person brings information back to you that there was no effect whatsoever, you might be able to increase that dose a bit. When they say, hey, I was a little more sore in the morning maybe, but certainly by midday I was back to baseline, that might be the sweet spot. And when someone says, I was miserable for 2 days, I was limping a little more, I was having a hard time with stairs, you might have overcooked that person a bit. So it's that 24-hour pain pattern that really gives you that information on whether or not your dosing was accurate. So use the in-clinic stuff to get you in the ballpark, and then use that patient report when they come back, right, to really make sure that you're being properly dialed in. I think we fail on that 24-hour pain pattern often. I think we fail to give the patient those specific instructions to pay attention to how they feel over the next day so that we can fine-tune that dose. One other thing in that Tom Goom article I mentioned that I think is huge is they tracked day by day. So in other words, they gave the patient an instruction to assess their pain and tolerance at a specific point every day. And as the course of rehab goes forward, you should not see that getting worse, right? So what I mean by that is if someone has, say, a proximal hamstring tendinopathy issue that you're working through, you might tell them, hey, after you walk your dog every morning, because people usually have reasonably consistent days, right? So after you walk your dog in the morning, I want you to do that single leg bridge that we know brings on your symptoms. And we know that right now and historically, it's been about a 4 out of 10 level of pain across 10 reps, right? So you have a very specific thing you're giving that patient to do to test every day how they're doing overall. Right? And that sort of helps give you a little bit of insight into how the progression is going. And what you should tell them is, week after week, we should not be seeing that getting worse, that consistent reassessment. We should see that getting better. So even one more way for the patient to get some buy-in, great, because their day is going to go up and down. I mean, depending on what they do, what they're doing in the gym, what they're doing at work, their overall symptoms are going to go up and down. But if you have something relatively consistent, they can check in with to see what the overall projection is. It's going to give both you and the patient a little more confidence regarding their loading program. Okay, so that was what I want to chat about this morning, because we get so many questions about, Jeff, we hear load it. We understand that applying load to tissue is going to help remodel, going to help move things forward, but how much? Right? And I think these are really going to be your guidelines. General irritability of the patient, their overall pain response during the exercise, that 24-hour pain report, and then maybe slipping in that consistent reassessment at a given point, at the same point in the individual's day with the same exercise, and having them assess how their tolerance of that is. Right? And the big thing, I was just hanging out with Chris Johnson in Seattle, which is always a good thing. And it really reminds me that we shouldn't bail on the patient's functional activity until we really need to, right? So if somebody has a real stable condition, right, try to modify before you restrict, right? So when somebody has a tendinopathy that's real stable, right, and let's say they are a runner, right, and running does increase their symptoms, before we tell them to stop running, we should look at every modification in the book, right? How can we change your volume? How can we change your intensity? Can we change what time of the day that you run? Maybe doing it when you're more rested. What about the resting between runs, right? The inter-run rest period. How about changing what inclines you run on or what shoes you run on? The point is, if we can keep somebody doing what they love and keep them doing their primary functional activity by modifying other variables besides just telling them to stop, right? I think that's invaluable. And I love talking to Chris because, we're talking about this tabletop test that Chris does. It's fantastic. Kind of looking at some key things down in the ankle and how that progresses up the kinetic chain. But Chris was talking about, Jeff, if this is clear, I'm getting them running right away. We're going to get them running. We might have them running differently or make cadence modifications or make volume changes. We're going to get out there and do the thing they love. And so I guess I would just encourage us that when you recognize that you have a stable tendinopathy on board, right, I don't think stopping what they're doing is the right call. I think looking at every modification in the book, right, and keeping that stimulus going, but doing it in a way that doesn't disrupt that 24-hour pain pattern, right? That doesn't bring them to a 7 out of 10. though you utilizing that framework is going to give you more confidence that you're not making things worse while you allow them to continue their primary functional activity. So just some thoughts on dosing in general this morning. I will try and get some of that literature up for you guys. Again, I've got a podcast in like 8 minutes, but I'll knock that out and then I'll circle back around and I'll try to get some of these articles up for you guys, and maybe we can continue the overall discussion on progressive loading and all that it can fix, kind of the science behind the sermon in the Facebook page. So guys, have a great Thursday. I don't think I'll see you next week. I think Alan's going to jump on next Thursday, and then I'll probably jump on the following. So guys, enjoy the day. If you're in patient service, serve them well. I will talk to you all soon.